Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Carl Faree, and before we will get started in the next few minutes, so probably closer to the 3 minutes past mark. In the interim, a little bit of housekeeping that we will repeat is please do hold your mute. Keep yourself on mute for just a quick part of the update presentation that I will be running through to centralize everybody around the concept. Feel free to start putting your questions in chat. There is dedicated time for you to ask questions. We'll probably take the first 10 minutes just to align everybody on the overall concept, walk through a few things about Digital Square for persons who are new to the space, and we do welcome your questions to go ahead. So thank you, everybody. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. All right, it looks like we've reached a good time to get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Carl Faree. I'm the Deputy Director of Global Goods here at Digital Square. And I'm excited to be your host and hopefully the chief answerer of the questions you bring to the table around the RFP that was released on the 10th of April. We'll take a few minutes just to walk through Digital Square, a little bit more about us as an initiative that we understand that at least half the world lives in a space where access to healthcare is not as uniform as we'd love it to be. We do see that we want to provide country leaders with the resources necessary to create the digital transformation for the populations that they serve. So we see our role in this space is to bring partners together and to improve how the broader global community designs, uses, and more importantly, pays for digital health tools and the approaches in this space. The Digital Square is a thriving digital health marketplace, or the good old concept of a square, where supply and demand come together, and we aim to accelerate health equity through the adoption, development, and scale of and delivery of digital health interventions. We have three key areas that we do this as an initiative: the alignment of investors and government bodies to ensure that there is a shared vision around the country needs and priorities. We promote a lot of the adoption, development, and reuse of digital global goods for health. And we also work with regional and country bodies to strengthen both national and regional level digital health transformation opportunities and designs. We have a few key principles and core principles that we believe in as an initiative, and we encourage our investors and collaborators to align to. And that is providing an ecosystem of choice. We are strong advocates for open standards and architectures. We do believe very much in local sovereignty and particularly the localization of tools and solutions so that there is more local support for these interventions. For many of us, we are both active and lapsed technical staff with a love for agile and iterative evolution of solutions to bring responsive change to the ecosystem. And we also believe in being inclusive and transparent to make sure that we redistribute our decision-making and create a more transparent and inclusive process when engaging with, in many cases, governments or technical vendors as terms of how do we find the best solution for the problem that we have the responsibility of curating. We have three key areas that we work across: the alignment and co-investment, often called Result Area 1, global goods ecosystem, and country digital and transformation. Well, those are a little unfamiliar with ourselves. So we aim, under our Result Area 1, the alignment and co-investment, we aim to see better alignment and co-investment in the digital health sector to support a healthy marketplace. Our team here cultivates partnerships towards a shared digital health vision. We try a lot to align investments, allowing multiple investors to pool and their funding and resourcing towards a larger solution, and as well as creating common evidence base to improve the understanding of digital health and disseminate both the market analysis, the evidence base, as well as learnings from countries to the broader ecosystem. The work that we're talking about today would fall under our global goods ecosystem. And this is the area that I wake up worrying about in the mornings. How do we strengthen the global goods ecosystem? How do we find a way for interoperable, adaptive open health solutions to continue to make the impact that they're doing? And how do we harmonize and unify our direction to both create the direction that we see we're going towards, but also share that vision with countries and different groups and teams? So we aim to do a lot of work around diversifying the broader ecosystem and bringing in more local entrepreneurs. We have transparent processes for procuring work and facilitating it. We may aim to connect and engage a range of global goods within the broader communities itself. And we do a lot of focused efforts around aligning our space on the health standards and technical design patterns. And our country teams look at how do we bring this all to the fold in the country? How do they provide advisement to country projects? How is there opportunity to advocate effectively for global good technologies to be within the choice domain to be utilized? And how do we mobilize partnerships to move things forward? With that very quick overview and keeping track of our time as we're going through here, I want to spend the next few minutes just aligning and lifting out some of the components of the RFP that we published. If you have any questions for those who joined a little late, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. Alternatively, within the next 10 or so slides, we'll be breaking for a Q&A session to move things on. So a summary of what we're looking at this stage. Now we're requesting proposals for the development of an open source testing harness and complete test framework that particularly facilitate how well technologies align to the OpenHIE architectural specification, but also can be reused to help groups who want to align to the WHO SMART guidelines. We're looking for interested applications. Those who wanting to build on existing initiatives are always preferred than a new, particularly something that is existing or is built on existing tooling to ensure that there is a space for reuse and ongoing support. We're wanting to make sure through this process that this work is not done in a silo, but that there is active engagement with both the OpenHIE communities and the SMART guidelines communities themselves to ensure that the requirements and design patterns that are discussed there are being strongly considered as this work progresses. And at the end is we are looking for a solution to have a permissive open source license to better facilitate ongoing community contributions, reuse and adaptability by various groups interested in deploying a tool like this in support of their own projects, in support of country initiatives, and or other global initiatives looking at identifying conformance to architectural standards and so forth. To level set on this definition here, we refer to a testing harness as a collection of tools and data that is used to test an application for conformance to defined specification. In that, the harness itself is envisaged conceptually to be made up of an execution engine that would allow the running of tests that are either described as stepwise processes or automated test scripts, as well as there being data to validate these tests. There is no use saying, can you query 1,000 patients and give me the one I'm looking for if there is not a data set of 1,000 patients that are well known and we're able to understand if things are able to work. So we want to make sure that this is coming through clearly and that there is a clear separation of concerns between these components, particularly as we focus on a reuse approach, where groups may want to in future leverage the defined tests and or reuse some of the actual test execution code and so forth. So as we mentioned, the harness itself will have your execution engines as well as your test scripts and descriptions moving forward. The other side of it is the results of a tool undergoing and going through this testing process needs to be collated and presented in a report itself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. Let's make sure that clears. So a high-level overview from a more of a component concept approach here is we're seeing the testing harness itself allowing the curation and the dependencies from both the requirements and dependencies, that content being brought in and documented in a more test-driven language. We have clear understanding of what the steps are to achieve those requirements, the leveraging of test data and test plans, the processes or methods of how one will execute against those tests, be they stepping through it from a manual perspective for more user interface testing, or more automated testing for interoperability flows and so forth. These are to be generated in the test results output, which, not to confuse the word test results with framing it as a fire test results resource, but rather the results of the tests in an open standard. And we're encouraging applicants to propose in their technical proposals how this would be done in their tooling. What is the open standard? What is the open format that they'll be using and moving with? The testing harness itself is envisaged to be reused across a range of projects and may find itself living in a country where having multiple instantiations of requirements within itself. So it needs to be able to be added to and reuse key components of it. So one could see a world that exists where both the OpenHIE tests as well as any WHO Smart Guidelines tests exist at the same time within a single tool. And in addition, any other country opportunities or other global initiatives. So we want to make sure that the proposal that is coming together is not deem it saying one grouping of tests per instance, but rather it could be put together collaboratively and see reuse across these spaces. Mentioned a little earlier, and hopefully this does come out in the proposal itself, we are looking to make sure that we're able to do a range of testing, not just automated testing, which for a better sake here is often easier done from the interoperability perspective, where the expected interfaces, the expected outputs are well described and should be common across a range of tools. But there needs to be the ability to have more functional testing done too. And this may be as you investigate the OpenHIE specification. There are functional requirements, say, for example, a client registry, which states that there needs to be the ability to configure matching algorithms. Now, to run that in an automated fashion would be extremely time consuming to build that for each tool that wants to go through it. There needs to be a structured way for that to be evaluated from a user perspective, whether it's capturing screenshots and or the various steps that the tester would go through to show that that tool is conformant and so forth. As mentioned earlier, we expect the test results to be published in an open standards-based results format that can be consumed by other tools. We are looking for strongly a preference. We have a preference for reuse of existing industry standards as they exist. But we just want to make sure that this report must be in a digital format and API consumable that allows other tools to leverage it, reference it, and consume it in their different workflows as needed, or in tooling such as the Digital Public Goods Alliance site, or from the global goods aspect. We want to have an authoritative way of being able to read these cleanly. Talking very much to the principles of Digital Square and our collaborative and reuse approach, this work that is being funded is expected to be aligning with the OpenHIE communities, and that the selected vendor would work within those communities to understand the work that's happening, to advance the testing and the specifications, so forth, and contribute the work back into the space. And in addition, align with the WHO Smart Guidelines work and community. So there is an expectation to reuse the instant OpenHIE frameworks and to leverage that to and advance them as necessary to achieve the results of this particular tooling, to build the key testing infrastructure. If the applicant or the vendor has a different approach, we would ask you to clearly document and justify it in your proposal to bring that forward. So summarizing our deliverables, at a minimum, these are, as stated, the minimum expected set of deliverables, but we would expect between this to be additional outputs that are generated through the work itself, but clearly documented design and specifications of the testing harness, clear product information and user manuals, remembering that it's not just developers who will need to use this, but the implementers and more high-level staff. Fully functioning testing harness, meeting the prescribed features in the RFP, as as well as the test suites covering the various different scenarios, particularly a full set of test suites for the OpenHIE architectural specification. That is our baseline at this stage. All tests described in Gherkin. If you feel there's a better or a different language, we would ask you to justify and motivate that. But again, we're looking at an open, collaborative way of sharing this information. And the test packages should be hosted on GitHub or similar, as well as clear, well-written set of documentation as outlined in the RFP and above for the test harness that's hosted in the open hosting platform. As we run down to the last few slides for this, just a summary of the approach and where we are today before we break to the Q&A. This was released on the 10th of April. Today, we're sitting in our virtual Q&A session. Applications are due May the 12th, and the times in that are detailed in the RFP through the WiseHive platform. If there are any questions around that, Maria's online and we can be happy to answer that too. What is different is we will be shortlisting a set to go through a design presentation, which is I will talk to in a minute. The final applicant will be notified of the decision at the end of June, and then a single vendor will be contracted for a duration of up to 12 months to complete this work. So to summarize our application requirement before I hand the floor over to yourself to hopefully pepper me with a few questions, we would expect a narrative of your technical approach as identified in the RFP that includes a detailed work plan, well-documented design of the overall solution. It is important to us to understand your architectural overview of how you see the various components of the testing harness to be put together, particular interest in the tools and links to those tools, as well as the licensing that these tools are available under, remembering our preference for permissive open source licensing. Any standards, norms, or guidance that you're going to be using, as well as a justification for those. And again, reiterating a clear documentation of what tooling is being used. We are requiring that the work be broken into work packages that you are best to frame. We are not at liberty to fund a single work package for we did it all. We'd strongly recommend you break it down into key components, and what also gives us a better understanding in terms of what would be delivered to each of these work packages. If you are working as a consortium, and especially if you're a single unit bringing this together, we want to understand what the applicant or consortium's experience is to meet the needs of the project. We are very much expecting that there are teams with demonstrated experience in software testing and quality assurance good practices, i.e. those who've gone through this would have a good knowledge of what a tooling like this should be able to do and how it comes together. We're also wanting to see in the application some documented user stories and use cases for how a user would evaluate a software utilizing your proposed solution, how these tests would be, the tests that are housed in the testing harness would be run against the software tool, and what would be the steps for new tests or additional features to be added in terms of test suites and so forth to the testing harness, or editing of previous. This again is to understand what the expectation is and the user in terms of their competency of running these tools in the wild. There is a template that one does need to please adhere to with a maximum limit of 14 pages. Appendices are welcome, but we do ask that you focus your key work in the 14 pages and assume that you're able to reference the appendices, and if there is need, we will go through those, but your value proposition needs to be clearly documented in the first narrative template. This will be reviewed by the Technical Evaluation Committee, and a shortlist will be identified of vendors, and they'll be invited to provide a design presentation, which is focused at ensuring that there's clarity in terms of what has been written up on paper, that there's an overview of the solution that is being proposed, either a very detailed walkthrough of your proposed technologies that one would be pulling together, or even a demonstration of what your existing tooling does do, and so forth. And from there, the Technical Evaluation Committee will make a final review and recommendation of the way forward. So thank you for your time on that. And that is the first 20 minutes of our time together done. And I will happily answer any questions that there may be at this space. If you want to come off mute, you're welcome to do that. or if you feel like putting it in the chat, I will respond to the best of my abilities. Kunjan, I see your hand has come up.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Carl. So my question is related to the functional testing. So it was mentioned in the presentation that the functional testing would be application based, obviously. So is it expected from the testing harness to provide a feature or a place where the end user is able to maybe write down or configure test cases related to the application, or is it something where the vendor has to intervene and create the test cases for the newer applications functional testing?
Thanks, Kunjan. I'll try answer that the best I can. The vision is that the vendor would not need to intervene to allow the functional testing use cases to be included. What we would deem as an example of how functional testing could work is, let's pick a tool A as a login page, and one needs to be evaluated. The one requirement that exists is that the technology needs to provide user restricted access to access the medical data. Step one would be, is there a login page? Can you log in? That we would want to see and have the ability for the person running the test, i.e. administering the test through the testing harness, to walk through a guided stepwise approach of open tool, be presented with a login screen and indicate that yes, this does exist, whether that is captured in a screenshot or in a similar process to the way more of the industry tools are doing it. We'd be very interested in seeing what the proposal looks like. But to be able to step through that at the end of this process, if there is a pass or a fail, there's a clear set of documentation as to how that test was run and what the results of that were. And I think when there's more user interaction, when you can capture how things are moving. But to add additional tests, we would expect that to be done in more dynamic fashion, i.e. not to be recompiled, but rather to be added to the tooling going ahead. Has that answered your question? Happy with a thumbs up if that is.
Yeah, that does. Thanks, Carl. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Nathan, I see there's a question from you that I'm just going to read here. It's like, is Digital Square open to working with more than one vendor if a vendor can demonstrate they are highly qualified in one aspect of the RFP? We are. The short version of that is no, we're contracting a single consortium. We would encourage that if there is interest in collaborating between any vendors, that they form a consortium prior to bidding. We are not in a position to knit together the different groups to bring things together, to bring the different groups together through different components. The second question, what would the location be of the project? Right, there's a lot there, let me get through. This is a global project. There is no on-site facility. This is a development tool that needs to come together, like development and more infrastructure tooling. It will be tested by, the final delivery will be showcased to us, and to the end, the deployment of it would probably be in the region of either an AWS or a similar hosting service, but it would also be available for implementers to download and implement on their own space. There's a lot of good questions there. Let me just try to go through them quickly and go through from there. Project office location, I think I've dealt with that. Travel requirements, you are welcome to propose any travel that you deem necessary to complete this. At this stage, there is no on-site requirements or visits. If you are engaging in the OpenHIE and smart guidelines communities, you may want to consider putting in travel requirements to meet your project needs, but we do not have any mandatory travel requirements at this stage. In terms of the piloting, that would be done on a more agile approach within the OpenHIE communities, and we'd expect it to be iterated and rolled through there, as well as aligning with the WHO smart guidelines and, as need be, supporting them as it grows. Any post-production support, this tool, at this stage, there is not an ongoing contract for this. This is about packaging a solution that's available, and we will negotiate with the funders and investors for any future support in this. The training and capacity building aspect, I think I've dealt with, but there should be documentation that clearly unpacks how implementers are able to adopt and bring this tool forward. I am unsure of your next questions around costs there, Sega. I'll give you a minute to come back to it. All right, there's quite a few in there. Let me sort of walk through them bit by bit. Details for each cost component structure for one resource or all. I think what we're looking at is from the description of the template. There is your key structural areas that one needs to justify your costs against. There is a budget template that is provided if need be. You're welcome to justify against that. Do I require consultant-wise? If you want to clarify that question for me in chat, and I'll follow up on it. Costs need to be all-inclusive. If you are, please make sure you're including any taxes or VAT in this. Those will not be added to the cost of it. Not sure of selection, what you're referring to by QCBS or L1. Can you clarify that? And your standard template. How does project relevance work? We'd want to understand, and we encourage applicants to showcase their ability working through these spaces. There's a lot of context that is provided in the RFA in terms of where this work is coming from and the work that is expected to be taken forward. So we'd ask you to, in your project relevance, showcase, for example, where you've maybe engaged in conformance testing, where your tools have been reused, what's your experience in terms of working with the different communities and so forth. The bid currency will be US dollars. And as mentioned earlier, the preference is for open source tooling. Hope I've got all of those. If there's any particular one I've missed, please lift it up in the chat and we'll follow through.
Hi, Carl. Sorry, I couldn't. The question is that when there is a standard template which you have given for financials, in that, the subheads are something like consultants, direct costs, indirect costs, and all. So we are not able to, understand, because it's a lump sum which we need to quote, or consultant wise which we need to quote, or something else.
Okay, I think I have a better understanding of what you're referring to at this stage. You are able to lump sum it at the going forward from there. We will follow up. For those who are interested and need a bit more detailed description, please put your email address in and we'll get our operations team to have a more granular response to you. But if you are breaking down any of your activities through work packages, through these category areas, we will need to have a justification of the costs per deliverable in your proposal, broken out roughly in these areas themselves.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And how will be the selection process? Is it quality based or least cost based or best technical proposal based? How are you going to select the vendor?
The selection has been laid out in the RFP in terms of the criteria one's looking at, with a breakdown and weights in between the technical aspect. So okay. You'll find that on page 10 of the RFP, which talks to your technical, your experience, and your costs. Each are weighted differently, and these will be reviewed by the technical evaluation committee and weighted against so forth.
Okay, got it. Thanks. I'm done. Thank you.
Great. All right. So I see Bryn, who's over the picture of Jan, so we'll figure out which one you are. Will there be a global good defined that is able to consume smart guidelines? The test harness will be expected to prototype and pilot against, or will this be theoretical since no global goods can? So let's break that apart there. The focus of this tooling is the OpenHIE specification as a primary focus. So we want to be able to test how the tools meet the requirement of being a client registry or a facility registry or a SHR interoperability layer and so forth. And the deliverable must be a comprehensive set of test cases that justify how a tool meets the OpenHIE specification. Of those tests, those that are reused within the WHO Smart Guideline is fantastic. And we would then also engage with the WHO to see how much of this underlying infrastructure they would want to reuse as an option for their evaluation framework. But does that help answer your question there? Great, thank you. Sure, Alexander, thank you. The link for the template document that is in the Wise Hive approach, Maria, I'm going to ask you to put that in the chat. That would be great. Thank you. All right, Peter, I'm seeing a question. Is there a vision that the test harness is a cloud hosted solution that is accessible to IHE and smart guidelines community? If so, in an implementation case in the future, this may be something that groups want to host on their own space. But for us, we want to see that the tooling is available under an open license, and it could be done in the future in that way. But at a minimum, we want to be able to see it deployed on site or in country as needed. So, is there a mechanism to get additional queries resolved before the submission date? At this stage, this has been our primary Q&A aspect of it. I will say that there is a meeting happening next week in Malawi that a few of our team will be at. The Digital Square team will be at the OpenHIE event. So those who have questions are welcome to meet us there. Alternatively, if you have anything that you'd like to follow up on, please actually do draft it an email to the contacts in the RFP, but our cutoff time for questions will be the end of next week, and we will respond to you by then. Nitin, you've asked what versions of Fire should be supported. A key call out in this RFP is this is not a Fire only testing harness. This is supposed to be inclusive of any tests that are defined. So we would see this being that any of the IHE profiles that are coming from the OpenHIE architecture, any of the Fire versions that are defined, one needs the ability to test for that. We also strongly recommend that there is a focus on reuse of existing tooling. So as one would, for example, describe a test for PDQ and for a client registry as an example, so are you able to pass this profile? If there is existing infrastructure that lives in the wild that is accessible without cost or sign up, we would rather see that the descriptor of how the test needs to run be described in the testing harness and the execution code be pointed to with the ability to have the tool execute against that. As there's no need to rebuild things unnecessarily in this space. We really don't want to build a competing area around here, but we do want to make sure that the deliverable here adheres to that principle of being a global good, which is accessible to all. And also we want to make sure that there's an ease of accessibility and it's not hidden behind a very complicated way of understanding things. So I'm hoping that's answering the Fire question. Ravi, the recording will be published and be linked to on the site itself, and we'll have this on the wiki, so you'll have access to this. Great. Is there any expectation of the solution to support localization of user interface to languages than English? That's a great question. As of now, we don't require it, but because we're encouraging teams to consider reusing existing tooling, it is something that would be of interest to ourselves. It won't be a deciding factor, but it would be something that would be very much aligned to the principles we believe in as Digital Square in the global space of seeing the tools be not just Anglo-centric, but looking also to reach the Francophone Africa, as well as Portuguese, Spanish, and even further east. All right. Because like these, why are these things being mentioned separately in cost? You do not need to use all of those descriptions. And this is inherited from the underpinning budgeting source, where often one needs to understand personnel are generally direct staff members that are coming in with yourselves. There are contractual, which are often resulting in other firms one would contract, and consultants are often just direct contracts with individuals itself. But as you bring your costs together, please make sure you're framing your costs in your work packages to the best of our ability. And if there are any further questions around this, please document them, send it to us, and we'll get our operations team to respond as quickly as possible. Is there any expectation to integrate this with the current tools, IHE, Gazelle, NIST? Mo, we'd love to see that happen. What we do not see at the moment is a unified interface into the OpenHIE testing infrastructure, testing space to say, how does a tool assert that it conforms to the OpenHIE specification? So one could see this as a facade to interface and point to any of the tools such as IHE, Gazelle, or the NIST tools, and be very clear about where those are and how those interface. We'd want to, so we're very open to seeing something like that. And I think that talks very much to our principle of reuse and alignment to the broader industry space. Oh, well, the entire OpenHIE component architecture, not just a particular one. I often use the client registry as it's quite a more comprehensive, easier one to understand, but we'd expect there to be the tests for all the components and also the generation of the tests that are required to meet the requirements and workflows as outlined in the architecture itself. I.e., if there are requirements and functional specifications for a facility registry or a provider registry, the vendor would be expected to develop the test cases that form part of the test suite to meet those. They may not exist already. Natan, that would come out through your engagement in the OpenHIE community. There is an OpenHIE architectural team, and there are various different communities within the broader OpenHIEs. So we'd encourage the applicant to engage with them, as well as asking questions to that space. There is not a single person from each of those communities to work together, but we would ask you to work with that broader community. Fantastic. I think we've reached, I'm seeing us slowing down of questions in the chat. Are there any questions from those on the call that you'd like to ask verbally? Feel free to come off mute and bring things to light. All right. Well, with that said, I think we reached a relative. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, I fixed my name, by the way. It really is Jan. But
Appreciate that.
Britt and I were doing a meeting last week. One other question that I'm nearly positive you won't be able to answer, but it's my responsibility to ask it. Is there a budget ceiling on the RFP?
Due to the procurement approach to this, we are not publishing a budget ceiling to make sure we do not violate any of the regulations around it. So please propose your accuracy of what you require to do the work and break it down by work packages that we can have a better understanding of how things could work together.
Great. Is there a ceiling on the indirect costs?
Not that I'm aware of at this stage. I would need to check that with the broader team. If you've got an agreed indirect cost rate, then that should be okay.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I know like in certain funders, I don't know who's behind this one, but certain funders have agreed upon rates with USG and partners, and so I would welcome a ceiling.
The funding behind this tool is a combination of Gates Foundation and possibly USAID.
Oh, great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And we're open to cost reimbursable agreements be made, or as well as fixed fee deliverable agreements themselves. Probably more towards the latter, to be honest.
Well, can you say that again, Carl? It cut out slightly, that last piece.
Yeah, we're open to cost reimbursable style of agreements on the space, but probably what we really expect to see is more fixed fee deliverables with clearly defined deliverables and fees associated to the delivery of that work.
Will one sort of proposal score higher than the other between fixed and T&M, or?
No,
Okay,
no,
so be rate.
proposals will be evaluated on their technical competencies. And as you would see from the weighting section, the technical approach is 50 points. The experience of the team is 20 and costs are 30. Within the costs, it would be balanced. The type of approaches does not weigh either way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any further questions from the community on the call today? All right, then, as we look to wrap up the conversation today, this recording will be published on the Digital Square Wiki and in relation to the webpage where you'll find this, so you can get better access to it. If there are any follow-up Q&A questions, we do ask for them to be sent to us by the 5th of May. At the latest, answers will then be published on the 9th or 10th on the same wiki in an open format. But we prefer you to get the questions in sooner. The sooner we have all those questions, the easier it will be for us to put it out. So keep an eye on the solicitations page on Digital Square, as well as the page on the wiki if there are any questions there. With that, unless there's anything for the good of the order, and I'm going to give it 30 seconds, I'm happy to close the call. Ravi?
Hey, just one quick query. You mentioned all the Q&A will be published by 10th of May and 12th May is the deadline. Is there any possibility either you can publish it a little earlier or extend the day, because, you know, extend the deadline either of them, because otherwise we get only to get that.
No, we will not be extending the deadline due to external pressures, but we are happy to try. We want to make sure that those who are not attending the OpenHIE event have as much opportunity to ask questions to the team that's there. And that event closes on the Friday. So we will do our best to get this published as soon as possible. Over the weekend being quite a difficult time to get everyone working. So Monday, 8th or 9th would be the last that we would be able to get that out.
Okay.
So we would hope that the questions from today would help everybody move things forward.
Thanks. That helps.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your time today. We do really appreciate you showing interest in this space. We're excited to get your applications in and your proposals. If there are any questions about the WiseHive approach, it is clearly documented, and we have some resources on that. And you do have the contact details for Maria and the RFP itself. So with that, we're going to close the meeting today, and this will be published quite soon. Thank you, everybody.